Hi, and welcome back to Broadsheet Sydney Around Town. If it's your first time here, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a video. I'm Emma Joyce, Broadsheet's features editor, and I'm the host of this short guide to Sydney. Let's get into it. Hi, Tommy. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we were just mentioning this before we hit record. I walked out of the matinee performance of On the Beach. You are the playwright for On the Beach. You adapted this particular production, a brand new production from the 1957 novel. And I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. And I know a bunch of people around me were saying just how eerily relevant the whole production is. So we'll get into that in a minute. But I'd love to know, about 6 years ago, you and artistic director Kip Williams were having a conversation about a book you would like to adapt to the stage, and you decided to do On the Beach by Nevil Shute. Why?
I think I was struck by a few things. Firstly, at that time, I remember reading it going into the summer of 2018, and Sydney was on fire. So I thought this is a really resonant way to tell a story about the climate crisis, but without telling a story about the climate crisis, to do that via metaphor. And then personally, I thought that its story of loss and of dealing with loss, but despite your emotional response to the play, a kind of strange optimism, even though it's about the end of the world.
Oh, I completely agree. There's hope, there's humor.
There's hope, yeah. There's something affirming, and particularly because he says to us, Shute says it's not too late. Mm-hmm. So in that way, he is certainly trying to alarm his readership, and the play is trying to alarm its audience. But there's a message of, be active and it's not too late. That story of coping, of resilience, of coping with loss spoke to me personally. And then the pandemic happened, and I think those themes mattered even more.
So you were already approaching something with the lens of climate crisis is very much upon us, and this is an urgency that we should act upon. And somebody who's written a book in the 1950s has all of these sort of resonant themes that feel like he's kind of projecting ahead and seeing the future.
That's right, because he is saying something to us, even from 1957, about our duty to our planet. And then there's those other uncanny things. I mean, you'll have heard in the play, there's mentions of Odessa and the Black Sea region and conflict between NATO and Russia. All of these things that are the spookiest prophecies. Odessa's in the news this week. So I guess in that way, he's attuned to mistakes that get repeated. But then there are other things that I felt, there's sort of images in the book, and you'll have seen this in the play, that On the Beach seems to sort of give us pictures that feel a bit like social distancing. When Peter comes back from the mission and he's got measles and he's made to stay apart from his child, or when Moira describes the great cities of the world emptied of people, and that seems like a reference to lockdown. But
we don't really have to imagine too much, because we have seen some of this and what it feels like. So if you haven't heard of On the Beach, you've got no idea what we're talking about, can you give us a kind of summary of the story? Yeah,
so Nevil Shute's novel gives us this almighty premise, and that is that World War III has happened. Oppenheimer is our prequel. So that happens. World War III goes ahead in this version of history, and this toxic cloud resulting from radiological warfare is making its way down the globe, and Australia and then Melbourne will be the last major population. And this story is about the people there in Frankston, about including a naval commander of a submarine who has escaped the war and survived here. And then some Australians as well. And it's about their battles of how they approach the last days of their lives, and how they also find, I guess, because all of their tomorrows are disappearing, that they focus on the moment. They know how to live in the moment. And that's another thing that struck me. That's an incredibly contemporary idea.
Now, I'm going to pick up the program because I don't want to paraphrase you. As the playwright, you have source material, which is the original book.
Yeah.
There was also a film.
Yes.
Only maybe 2 years or so.
Yeah, it was
after
made
that
really
book was
quickly.
made,
Yeah.
starring Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner.
And Anthony Perkins being so hot. He's smoking hot in that film.
I haven't seen the film, but it does strike me that there's a couple of different storytellings of the same kind of the same story.
Yeah.
And then you've said that every adaptation must shapeshift from the source to embrace its new form. So with this new production and this shape-shifting, what were the main things that you wanted to focus on to bring this production to new audiences?
Well, I wanted to embrace that particular imagination that theatre loves. And my only source was the novel. We never had the rights to the film. And actually the film does emphasize things that weren't interesting to us. And it is a little dated, but the book was our inspiration. So I wanted to do what theatre does well, I think, and that is to make it really character rich, make sure all of those characters were contributing to the drama and driving it. And some characters in a novel and in this novel are able to be sort of, a spokesperson for the writer in a way that wouldn't be good on stage. And so there was that need to innovate some of the characters, particularly I'd say the female characters, Mary in particular. She is characterized via Schute's 1950s idea of a woman, and he sells her short. So we've made her a far more active and wise character and just a bigger player in the action. And she really is in many ways, the heart of the story. And similarly, Moira, even though she's a fabulous character in the book, her end point is really in deference to the man. And that's something that we've amended in our version and made her more powerful right to the end. And made her sort of more in charge of her destiny at the end of the story. So in those ways, we've mediated it. But I think, in terms of that imagination that theatre offers you, it's about dream, it's about memory. And in this story, it's about them sort of accessing that future that they're yearning for that's going to be robbed from them. We find theatrical imaginings of that.
What I really enjoyed as part of this production, and I imagine that it was a challenge to do, is that we've got all these layers of history. We know how things played out from the moment that book was released into the world. We know how it's happened so far, and some of those things have become true. We certainly have nuclear submarines.
Yeah.
We've definitely had more war. Maybe it's not World War III. Oppenheimer is in cinemas right now. It's something we're talking about a lot. We've seen the pandemic. And so many people in the audience that I was in said it was eerily relevant.
Yeah.
So how did you decide what you would include in this production of real life and what you would kind of leave for the audiences to kind of paint in themselves? Well,
that's a very good question. I think, Emma, I love the way you talk about the layers of history that are at play here, because that's part of my thinking on that, that there's this time game, which is fun. He writes the book in 1957, but he's imagining 1963. And here we are 60 years after that story setting. So that in itself is an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that are included that actually sort of are, well, I guess in addition to the storytelling of the novel, are depictions of that future or figures from that future that are impossible for the characters to actually know about, but we're able to render those apparitions via our stance here from the perspective of 2023. That said, in terms of the things that were in addition, I did several drafts where I think there was too much commentary. And it was just, it was a good part of my process to try that, direct commentary about the situation now, global politics or the environment. And I found myself wanting to wash those away from the draft and return to many of the impulses of Neville Shute, because his telling, his prophecy via metaphor of what we're going through now was more interesting.
Another aspect of this play that I think is something that haunts me still is how we've seen how our friends or our family react during the pandemic, let's say. Some of us maybe went into baking mode. Some of us might have been picking up a new hobby. Others could have been like, let's drink through this.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what's going to happen.
Moira does that.
Yeah. And this is played out through lots of different characters in a way that I thought was really interesting. Did you find that kind of reflective process? Did you think, some of, this is the way I acted when the pandemic came around, or I was the one under the doona, or I was the one actively trying to make sure that the future was going to be hopeful, or something like that? Yeah,
look, Moira's plan's a good one. She's like, well, the world's ending, let's party. Like she's not entirely hedonistic, but she's certainly medicating or embracing fun because that's a good coping mechanism. And then she finds something, a deeper connection throughout the play. And I think the other thing that feels contemporary in that regard is the characters' resourcefulness, and that's detail from the book. They're jerry-rigging their garden equipment and making do or pulling a Holden with a bull, things like this that are to an extreme but seem to speak to a story of a sort of resourcefulness and the resilience of the pandemic. And so teasing that out, particularly for the character of Peter, who, there's a hint of this in the book, but we really went to town with it, was that he feels that he can fix every problem. He's got glue in his shed. He can be resourceful and fix things. Maybe he can save the world, which is, a really kind of painful form of denial that he goes through in the play.
Another element that I thought was just fascinating is how funny it is when we look at potentially we've only got maybe 6 months left before the end of humanity.
Yeah.
And a lot of really funny jokes are in there. And I think particularly Australian jokes. I don't want to give anything away because I think some of them would be spoilers.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of humor that you feel like was, this is an Australian novel?
Yes. I mean, the book it does offer a lot of humor. And I think the Australian character here is in the way that many emotions sit next to each other, I think. We're very good at pulling the tension. And I think that's true of life. Like, I just think that the experience of life is never in accordance with genre. And that different emotions contrast and sit next to each other. People are really funny at a wake. And it might be about coping. It might be about a sort of pressure valve on emotion. But it's just true to life, like many emotions. And I think theatre just has to be funny at some point. Even this is not a comedy, but to show life truthfully, it's going to have those lighter moments. It's going to laugh at a crisis.
The actors are phenomenal.
Aren't they wonderful?
So wonderful. Tai Hara, it's his Sydney Theatre Company debut.
That's right. Yeah, and he's a very experienced TV and screen actor. He has done theatre before, and he's a trained actor, but I don't think he's been on the stage for a little while. And he's great.
He really brought that particular character to life for me. It was very, very fascinating to watch. But I'd say the whole cast is just phenomenal.
They're an extraordinary bunch, and they pour everything into these roles. And I think also there are actors there like Vanessa Downing and Emma Diaz who play smaller roles, or Elijah Williams, and they delineate all those many roles so beautifully. It's a great ensemble and a treat for a playwright to, Australian playwrights don't get to write plays on this scale on such a giant stage. I mean, the ROSPAC is huge, and 12 actors, like that's a rare treat for a playwright. So I feel really, really lucky.
I know exactly what you mean about Emma Diaz, I think.
Yeah.
Her particular roles within this, because there's multiple characters that she embodies are really stay with you. I don't want to say haunting again, but they stay with you in a way that only a couple of seconds on stage.
Yeah, she is the haunting part of it, actually. She
brings that quality.
Yeah.
Is there anything as part of the kind of rehearsal process once you brought the actors in that made you change how you had approached the adaptation?
Oh yeah, always. One of the great things about creating plays is that opportunity to collaborate with actors. So we did a workshop before rehearsals began. That wasn't entirely with this cast, but the actors that were available then, and we tested things, and I did some rewrites. And then, even in the rehearsal room, you're always testing it, always scrutinizing it. And that might happen line by line. And sometimes we would test things and say, oh, it's a strange sort of construction. But if it came from Neville Shute, I tried to preserve it. I loved the language of Neville Shute and took inspiration from his dialogue in the book as much as I could.
I thought it was really interesting that he didn't love the film adaptation.
I think it killed him. That's the rumor.
That is what you've said in the program.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. Well, I hope it's more than a rumor, but that's what they say, that he was unwell, but he was so outraged, particularly with the sex in the film. So yeah, rumor has it that led to the stroke that sadly killed him.
But you suggest that, yes, this sexual tension is there between the characters.
I kept the sex in. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel that is there's a lot of sexual yearning, and I feel that there is a 1950s kind of honouring of sexual restraint in the book that just wasn't interesting or truthful to me. So I let them have their route.
And I'm very glad you did. I think that it's part of the human experience and everything on stage. Why shy away from sex?
Why shy away?
Everything on stage On the Beach reflected back a little bit of what we have experienced, but also the horrors of what we could.
Yes, exactly.
And it's only showing until the 12th of August, I believe.
I know.
So if you want to see it.
It's a big theatre. There are still tickets available. But yeah, it's 12th of August we finish.
Definitely. And you can still get tickets at sydneytheatre.com.au. So run out and get it, I say. And that's all we have time for today. As always, you can keep up to date with what's happening around Sydney at broadsheet.com.au and on Instagram at broadsheet_Sid. I'll be back next week, same time, same place. Chat then.